artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hi, this is episode 263. We get at this thing called AI from all kinds of different angles. In fact, if there's anything that defines this show, that's our hallmark, it's that incredible diversity of angles that we slice AI from philosophy to anthropology to science fiction to law to finance and so on and so on. That's very deliberate. AI changes us in so many ways that it's vital to get a holistic appreciation for it. That's not going to arrive through just a technical discussion. Really, it's more about re-examining what it means to be human through the lens of AI. And so today, we look at AI through the eyes of Dagan Shani, an independent filmmaker who over the past 2 years has focused primarily on creating films about the risks associated with AI. His documentary, Don't Look Up, the documentary, The Case for AI as an Existential Threat, was described by MIT professor and head of the Future of Life Institute, Max Tegmark, as the most important film of the year. Shani's short documentary from 2024, Moloch, AI and the Deadly Force Driving Us to the Brink, and his latest film, Obsolete, Human Work in the Age of AI, both raise pressing questions about the rapid advancement of AI and its far-reaching implications. There are links to these movies in the show notes and transcript. They are stunning visual and intellectual feasts that explode onto the screen and demand your attention. They reach us subconsciously on an emotional level, which is an essential medium that is generally outside the repertoires of the many technical people publishing the most about AI at the moment. I have to warn you that the audio quality of the interview you're about to listen to isn't ideal in places. There were issues with the internet connection that our wonderful sound engineer Lee has heroically overcome to a large degree. Something to explain before we get started. You'll hear us talk about Moloch. In fact, you heard that mentioned in the title of one of Dagan's documentaries. That's one of those memes that's gotten some legs in the AI world, but it actually originates in the Old Testament as a god who demanded child sacrifice. And I was watching Fritz Lang's 1927 film Metropolis the other day, and Moloch showed up there as a label for the machine that powers the modern society but which insatiably devours the working class. Those are the sacrifices to it in the movie. The more modern revival, and the use of the term, comes from the poem Howl by Allen Ginsberg, where he repeatedly invokes the name in clauses like Moloch, whose love is endless oil and stone, Moloch, whose soul is electricity and banks, Moloch, whose poverty is the spectre of genius. And recently, Liv Boehry has expounded upon Moloch as essentially the god of zero-sum games. Look up The Prisoner's Dilemma, where two parties each have an incentive to cheat on the other. The psychology that drives people to take the low road, think about the arguments you may have seen for why a nuclear power should mount a first strike, is embedded in Moloch. Moloch is what makes them do it. And Dagan made a movie about Moloch and Liv Boehry. We'll explain it more when it comes up. So let's get into the interview. Dagan Shani, it's a pleasure to welcome you to AI and You. You have made some amazing movies. I'm just in awe of the amount of work that's in them. And actually, we just heard about their titles, but I'd like you to describe that work for our listeners who haven't seen them. Can you go over what your work is about, what it's like?
Thank you, Peter. I'm really honored to come here. Well, do you want me to go like film by film or just speak generally about what I'm worried about and why I do these films?
Just give us the general flavor of what these films are like. What would it say as the umbrella blurb for these movies, what niche they're in, what they're like?
Okay, so I'm like starting from the end of 2022 when ChatGPT was introduced to the world. I started to be very worried about AI and the risks that the AI is bringing to the world. And well, at the beginning, I was actually very worried about the work, like the job problem and the job replacement, the automation, etc. But then I stumbled into some of Eliezer Yudkowsky and Max Tegmark's interviews, and I thought that the most urgent problem was the existential risk. And therefore, I made the first film that I did, like Don't Look Up, the documentary. And then after I made it, I tried to explore all kinds of problems related to AI. So I made the film about the Moloch dynamic, which actually, my focus was actually AI, but I tried to frame it in a more broader way because Don't Look Up, the documentary was a bit like I criticized some very specific people in this film, mostly Sam Altman, but they wanted to go back and take a more broader frame and try to look at it from a more broader perspective of the game theory perspective of what are the forces that actually are in this game, which are not necessarily connected to a specific guy, but are more maybe common to humanity and to the market. So this is why I made the Moloch film, which speaks about one of the main dynamics that are pushing this race to where it is now. And then after I made this, I went to my original interest and worry after ChatGPT went out, which is the work problem, the job replacement problem. And then I made Obsolete, which is my last film.
I see. It's interesting to me that you're captivated by these fairly abstract themes here. I mean, the concept of Moloch, which we'll explain in a moment for anyone who doesn't understand, and game theory is, by definition, fairly theoretical. This is a theme of movies that is poles apart from the kind of storyline of boy meets girl, girl kills boy, whatever. You're communicating some pretty abstract things, especially on the existential risk front, because the existential risk of AI is one that no one will enumerate. No one will say how this is going to happen, because they say, if we knew, we could prevent it. It's the fact that the AI can come up with things we haven't anticipated that makes it an existential threat. What inside you is driving you towards bringing this message to the world?
Well, I can tell you that, there was this debate like maybe a month ago between Douglas Murray and Dave Smith about experts. And if someone who is not an expert is entitled to have an opinion about something. And I don't have my own point of view specifically about what they were saying, but I think that AI is something that is very obviously going to influence everyone. And since it's going to influence everyone, this is not something that we can leave for the experts, even truck drivers and even people in all kind of, that when you think about it, are as far away as possible from the AI community. They are entitled to their opinion. And I think if you have many experts, and you obviously have many experts that are speaking about a possible risk of human extinction, this is something that I, as a normie, that's what they call in the AI community, someone that comes outside of this space, I'm entitled to be worried about it and to try to make everyone else be aware of this problem. So I actually think that I'm relying on authority here. I don't have the qualification to actually say if the X risk is true. But what I can tell you is that there are enough people that have this qualification, and they actually said it is true. And also, I think that we're speaking about the X, but there is also the catastrophic risk, which is maybe not like everyone dies, but maybe like several millions or something along this line. This is something that I think that if we speak about AI misuse, not like AI losing control and doing something because it's already agentic and has its own goals, but actually AI that is operating because someone like a human being is operating it. I think it's almost intuitively obvious that something like this could happen. Even if I'm not an expert and I think about it, if you give human beings very powerful tools, it's bound to create some huge problems. So this is more or less the place that I'm coming from. And specifically about Moloch, this is actually, in a way, a film which is problematic because, well, this is a dynamic that speaking about it is a bit problematic from the place that you actually take away the accountability of people inside the systems, because you say there is a big dynamic that actually influencing them and they are bound to play by these rules, by the game theory rules. But I think this is very important to also put it on the table, because this is actually something that you can feel is operating in these systems. Of course, this is just one framework. There is a lot of ways to look at this problem, but I think this is something that is worthwhile thinking about and contemplating. So this is why I made this specific film.
Right. And there's a symmetry there, because you may not be the AI expert, but the AI experts cannot make movies like you've done. So you have filled that gap in the world and making this accessible on a different level to many people. Let's just, for the benefit of people who are wondering, what is Moloch? Because it's a relatively new term to me, explain it. I understand it as it's the win-lose problem from the prisoner's dilemma, the race to the bottom dynamic, the negative feedback cycle that causes or incentivizes people to be their worst selves to avoid negative outcomes. But since it's so central to at least one of your films, perhaps you could tell us what that is and why it's so important in AI.
Actually, I think you already described it very well. But if you speak about the prisoner dilemma, so we're speaking about a huge prisoner dilemma thing. It's not like for two people, it's like for numerous people. And specifically, it speaks about systems that are going corrupted by bad players. Basically, we're speaking about system that has many players. All these players want to win, and everyone has many values that they cherish. But one player might sacrifice this value, and all the other players, although they don't want to sacrifice this value, they have to do it because otherwise they will be left behind. So everyone is operating to achieve their selfish goals. And by doing this, they have to sacrifice something that will corrupt the whole system and hurt everyone. They externalize the problems to the commons and make it worse for everyone. And if you ask these players, do you prefer that the system will be as corrupted as it is because you sacrifice this value? Probably they will say, no, we prefer not. We prefer the system to be better. So it's like a bad competition. It's like a zero-sum game when everyone is playing in a way that everyone loses in some way or another, but they're doing it in order to win. So if we speak about, like, let's take a very simple example that I also speak about in the film, which is the problem of doping in cycling, in professional cycling. So if you see, like, there is an interview with Lance Armstrong, where he's saying that when we went to Europe to race, we didn't think about doping. We were just thinking about racing. That's what we wanted. But when we got there, we found out that if we want to keep up, the only way for us to keep up was to dope, because otherwise we couldn't take part in this game. So if you go back with doping, like, I don't know, like 30 years, you probably didn't have as much doping. If you see, like, Peter Attia in the film say that starting from the 90s, everyone was doping, more or less, the beginning of the 90s. But before, this was probably not the situation. So someone that went to race could get very good achievement just by basically relying on his body. But from the 90s, this was not possible. So someone started to corrupt this system, someone started to dope, and he had an advantage, and then other players saw this and had to do it also. So if you want me to put it on the context of AI, I could get into details about that.
And one of the examples of that you showed was Liv Bowery, and she goes on at length about Moloch and beauty filters as used in videos of women, and the widespread use of those, forcing women to present themselves as increasingly less like their real selves and more like some fantasy ideal. And AI is a tool that enables that, and presumably it shows up in many other ways as well. What do you see in particular in the competition perhaps between the different big AI companies that might be driving some of these unhealthy dynamics?
Okay, so first I want to add one aspect that I didn't mention. When this is the place where it's very similar to the prisoner dilemma, because when we speak about, specifically about, for instance, the beauty filters or the doping, no one knows for sure that the other one is doing it. But you have to assume that they do it, and that's why you are forced to do it yourself in order to keep up. So this is one thing that I wanted to also mention. And specifically about AI, actually there is a paradox that if you see the way that the AI companies were built, you actually can see that they were like motivated by very pure intentions of first doing good for humanity, and secondly, actually safety. Because this is something that I show in the film. Like at first, actually, Google DeepMind, like DeepMind, and then it was bought by Google, had a real advantage. They were the only serious lab that made like amazing things in AI. Elon Musk saw this, and he was very alarmed because he was a friend of Larry Page. And while he was speaking with Larry Page, he, according to him, heard from Larry Page that he actually is thinking about maybe that eventually AI will replace humans. And he was very alarmed about it. And then he said, okay, with Sam Altman build this OpenAI company. And this OpenAI company was supposed to somehow make sure these tools will be
open source. That was the open in OpenAI.
Yeah, but this is one thing. But I'm speaking about the safety side of it, which was to make it safer and somehow in this way influence Google and other players. Then in the OpenAI, they eventually came to a point where Dario Amodei had some disagreement with Sam Altman, also partly or all, I'm not sure exactly because there are a lot of stories about it, but due to safety considerations. So then he went out of OpenAI and opened Anthropic, which then had the LLM Claude, which now everyone knows about. But Claude and Anthropic also became like part of this race to the bottom, because while they were all, you can think about them as good players, as people that are actually want to achieve good things. If we look specifically about ChatGPT, which was developed by OpenAI, which was a good player, if we want to think about it like this, actually forced all the companies to get into a very risky race where they actually sacrifice safety, which was in the beginning their main, at least that's what they say, their main reason for opening these companies. So they're actually sacrificing this value, safety, in order to run faster to get to the big prize, which is AGI. And therefore, I think this is a very good example of the model dynamic. You sacrifice something in order to keep up in the race, and eventually you hurt the whole system. Like if you ask them separately, each and every one of them, they will tell you that they don't want these values to be sacrificed. They don't want safety to be sacrificed. But in order to achieve their selfish goal, they have to do it. So this is very suitable for the Moloch dynamic.
And that's one of those characteristics of game theory and systems thinking, actually, too, that you can have an outcome that none of the players wants. The Cold War, no one wanted thousands of nuclear weapons, but that's what they ended up with.
Right.
And now all of these things were going on in the background of public attention up until ChatGPT. Relatively few people knew about these things that were happening. Then ChatGPT came out, and we had a whole lot of rules and principles. Rule is stretching things a bit. We had principles like the Asilomar principles and other guidelines that were bandied about by AI safety people, saying these are the sort of things that we should follow in order to avoid unnecessary risk with AI as it gets more capable. And then ChatGPT came out, and we blew through all of those in like the first week. Like, don't hook up AI of unknown capability to the internet. Don't make it self-improving. People just did all of those things with it. And that put us in a different place, because I think it just simply illustrated that the more or less academic ideas we'd had before that of how we might restrain these things was simply impractical, because their direction was not going to be constrained by academics, but by some guy on a laptop who downloaded a model and said, "Here, hold my beer." So what aspect of the risk would you say is the one that you most want to alert people to? The one you think is perhaps most dangerous?
Well, I think obviously the most dangerous thing is the catastrophic risk. This is the most dangerous thing, but sometimes things that you don't get a lot of focus are even more dangerous because we don't notice them. I think that the problem, if you want to say it with AI, is that it's a big amplifier for every aspect in the world. So, of course, it can do a lot of good, but also the damage that it can do is amazing. And it's very hard to pinpoint specifically what it would be because it's everything. And we don't have, like, in the pace that things are developed, we don't have enough time to actually think about the implications. Because I actually made a small video for Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin back like 2 years ago. And it was around what they are speaking about lately, which is that social media was our first contact with AI and we didn't handle it well. And now we have the second contact, which is much more consequential. And if you see what happened with social media, and they speak about it also in Jonathan Haidt, I think, also speak about the fact that when it went out, it was framed as a totally good thing. Nobody spoke about the bad consequences that could happen because nobody could expect the consequences. There are a lot of things that we know just now or 10 years after it went out. You know, the influence on the mental health of young people, specifically of young girls, and, you know, the influence on truth, like the fragmentation of everything. Like everything became like you have your truth, I have my truth. There is no real truth. And this is very hard to build society and agreement on such. So all of these things were not expected, but they happened. And this was just one place, one tech, one space. Now we're speaking about AI integrated into every system of our lives. We have to take the way that we see that social media influence the world, we have to assume that AI will do it in each or in every aspect of our lives. And it's so hard to expect what will happen. So I think that the main takeaway here is that we are rushing and we're doing it too fast for us to actually mitigate the bad consequences. Because, people speaking about utopia and all the good things that will happen, but there is a huge trade-off here that we have to expect that will happen with the good that will come. There is too much bad that is going to happen in order to make the good worthwhile. So I think we have to slow down and even stop, specifically the frontier models, which are risking our lives. But it's true to every aspect of AI.
And so you would say that perhaps that speed is the most dangerous thing. And that's driven by Moloch as well. It's driven by the companies needing to get ahead to beat the competition because they're all bleeding money, and the one that gets ahead will make it back and everyone else will go bankrupt.
It's true. The money that the investors are putting into AI put these CEOs in such huge pressure to provide that this is something that they are, in a way, are forced to do. And this is not a good way for us to come to a good outcome.
Yeah.
The default is probably very bad.
Let's look at the hype now, because these issues were discussed by niche segments of the population prior to ChatGPT. Now it's on everyone's mind. And so the hype around AI, positive, negative, sideways, is through the roof. And in fact, you could study just the hype alone. Forget what the technology itself is doing. You could study the hype as a sociological phenomenon in and of itself. It's got a life of its own of the way that it captivates people. What do you think that the level of hype around AI at the moment is doing, specifically things about threats to employment, threats that we're talking about, which have this real dimension to them? But if people are scared crazy by that, what do we do about it?
Yeah, so this is actually a question that I'm asking myself a lot because as a filmmaker, I can make things very scary. For me, the material that I deal with is human emotions. So when I'm making films, if I can make myself feel something, for me, it is an achievement. But after I made Don't Look Up, the documentary, which was really scary, I thought about it. And Moloch maybe was a bit toned down, although not that much. But my last film was actually much more balanced and toned down because I had to decide for myself to make it like this because I was afraid that I'm putting too much bad energy into the world. But this is a very crucial question, and specifically about hype. Actually, in the Moloch film, I did a whole part about the hype because first, the hype is something that we have to assume because I don't know, like as I said, I'm not an expert, so I don't know for sure like how much hype there is in this space, but I can assume that there is a lot of hype. And this is a very crucial question because, some people like Gary Marcus, for example, are saying that, LLMs will not get to AGI. And some people, on the other hand, like Elon Musk and Sam Altman and Dario Amodei specifically, and also, the AI 2027 document are speaking about AGI somewhere around 2027. Some are speculating about even next year. And you never know what is the true answer here. So you never know if the fear is justified or not. This is such a confusing place to be. For me, for example, I'm trying to work on a new thing about the AI visual models. I'm constantly struggling with understanding if what I'm doing is actually, if it's actually true. And also every day you have new thing coming out, which totally change the assumptions and the reality that you are dealing with. So this is a real challenge to make films right now because you never know if it's a hype or not. So I don't know, like this is the reason that I specifically put the hype part in obsolete, in the film Obsolete, Human Work in the Age of AI, because I think this is a particle that we have to assume exists, but we never know how much. This is the problem. It's moving too fast. Everything is moving too fast.
Yes. And one of the aspects of that hype is about people's jobs. And I think if they looked at some of the stuff coming out of the Fortune 500 right now about how AI is going to take so many jobs, they would be petrified. But I also am trying to get to the bottom of how much hype there is there. I'm reminded of how a few years ago, I think preceded ChatGPT, there was a study done by some AI researchers of the impact of AI on various jobs. When would different types of jobs be fully automated and to the point where humans weren't needed to do that? And they came up with predictions of 10 years for farming. I'm making this up. I don't remember the actual ones. 20 years for creative arts, or 30 years for manual labor like plumbing and so forth. And all of their projections were under 40 years, except for one. One profession, they said it's going to take 80 years to automate. You want to guess what? AI researcher. They said, well, that will take 80 years. And this is something that I keep observing, is that people think that AI is going to automate everyone else's job that they're not familiar with a lot sooner than it will automate theirs. Of course, their job is so much harder. But I think they're right. I think that they can see things about their job and the ways that it would be too difficult for AI in ways that people not familiar with their jobs can't. And so I want to explore that with a job that's unfamiliar to me, which is filmmaking. In your shoes as an expert filmmaker, what can AI do now in that domain that it couldn't before? And what can't it do that you're not afraid of it taking away anytime soon?
Yeah, I actually wrote about it yesterday. I made 2 posts about it in Twitter. I think that this is really going to take away a lot of the filmmaking jobs. And I have to say that when I'm speaking about filmmaking, it's not, most of us are not in Hollywood making like a huge, we are not in Christopher Nolan. Most of the cinematographer or, of the editor and whatever, they are making a lot of their work in, for example, commercials. If we look at the new models that Google presented, and this is just going on all the time, there's constantly better and better models. So they have one specific limitation, which is they have very short shots. They can't go beyond several seconds. So for filmmaking, it's still very challenging. Like if someone wants to make a film that consists only of several seconds shots, he will probably have a problem, a full-length film. But first, we know that this is going to change. This is going to be longer, for sure. And secondly, as I said, many of us are making our living in the commercials industry. And commercials, for sure, are going to be replaced big time. You see it on YouTube every day by AI. And we had a very big pool of opportunities, and they are squeezed, they are shrinked a lot. So naturally, many of us will have to find another job because our income will be very influenced by these tools. And I think in the short term, like it will happen, it's already happening. And I'm speaking about numerous professions. Like yesterday in Twitter, I just took the page where Wikipedia says what are the professions in filmmaking. And you can see like so many professions. It's like, it's endless. And in commercial as well, you have this profession as well. So I think it's going to influence our industry big time, and many people will either have to make maybe half or less of the income that they were used to make, or they'll have to look for another profession, and I'm not sure what this profession will be. But specifically what I want to also say, that you saw some things that spoke about how many people will lose their job after how many years. This is actually something that I avoided in my film, Obsolete, because I couldn't get one prediction that totally correlated with the other prediction. And also, I think that there were, at least from my perspective, they were too optimistic. If you look at it from the worker view, they thought that it will take a lot of years. And I think it will take less. But you never know. You never know. Because, right now, the job displacement is not something that is happening like big time, that you can see it in the news. But it is actually happening. It's happening very gradually. And people are not connected, so they don't know that it's like a wave. They are not aware of it. But I think that on some point, this will be very obvious and things will start to shake. This is my opinion.
And I think your examples there really point up how granular this matter of automation is. To take filmmaking as an example, the commercial industry, I completely agree about how much AI can do that, because the goal of commercials is to present an idealized view of things. So they go to enormous extent to find perfect looking models, make them up so they look perfect. In other words, they go to a lot of expense to make them look like what AI generates by default. You have to work at AI to get them to make things look less perfect. And so if you want a perfect looking model holding a perfect looking hamburger, that is a very tedious thing to set up in a studio, but you can get it in seconds with AI. If you're not particular about where the hamburger is, how many patties are in it, other things that the AI may choose to hallucinate. But if, on the other hand, you're like James Cameron, to use a very picky director, it's got to be just so. And if the AI comes and puts a dog in the background and he says, well, I want the dog over that side of the sofa and it needs to be a Pekingese instead of a Chihuahua, well, that's when the AI is just not likely to give you what you want. Because if my experience with generating images and videos is anything to go by, it will get it half right and probably put a camel in the shot as well while you're at it. And I don't see any threat to that model of filmmaking on the horizon simply because of the way these things are done. We would still need a fundamental breakthrough, I think, before we got close to that model. And I think this is generalizable over every profession. But again, from your perspective as that filmmaker, where every frame that went up was exactly the way that you've envisioned it and created it, how close do you see AI getting to doing that?
Yeah, well, of course, AI now has a lot of limitations, but we see that things are getting better and better. So I assume I'm not like, first of all, there is an economist that just won the Nobel Prize called Dagan.
Acemoglu, yeah.
Yeah, which I feature a lot in Obsolete. And he's speaking about the so-so effect, that AI might not produce things which will be as good as people are doing, but it will be much cheaper.
Good enough.
Good enough, right. So James Cameron is like operating in a very exclusive and very rare place where he can actually get everything that he wants. So, but most of us, the industry, we are not functioning in this framework. And I think that producers, and we know it's like in filmmaking, outside of all of Hollywood, I assume also in Hollywood, but also everywhere else, filmmakers, most of the time just looking for money to make films. And you're constantly people that are giving you this money and want a return, and you have a producer that are trying to make sure that the budget will not be as big as it could be. So we are not functioning in this framework of James Cameron. There are a lot of compromises that are made. So I think specifically about commercial first, it's much shorter. So because it's much shorter, it can work with the limitation of AI right now. And everything that you said about it, I agree. I could totally agree. So I think that maybe if you speak about James Cameron, AI will not be a big part of what he's doing. Although specifically James Cameron, I think really like AI and he's very into new tech. But I'm speaking about people in his status. You know that Nolan, for example, doesn't like 3D animation and effects. He wants to build the set. But most of us will be influenced. Sure, right now there is the problem of hallucinations. Things are not accurate enough. And if we'll have like visual models stuck in the position that they are now, for sure, like the film industry will not be as influenced. But I think that maybe a year from now, things will be much better. So I assume that filmmaking is going to get hurt. And again, most of us are not making our money from Hollywood. We are making our money partly from also people that are making their money from the filmmaking industry are also making their money from the commercial industry. And if you have your volume of work cut by half, you might think if you want to continue doing it. So this is a problem, I think.
That's the end of the first half of the interview. Next half next week. This is pretty intense and there's a lot to reflect on, so it's good to take a break here for that reason, in addition to the usual ones. In today's news, ripped from the headlines about AI, Ohio State University has announced that starting this fall, every undergraduate student will be asked to use AI in all of their coursework. Not given the option of using, but required to use, as part of their AI Fluency Initiative. Ravi Bellamkonda, Executive Vice President and Provost at Ohio State, said, quote, "Through AI Fluency, Ohio State students will be bilingual, fluent in both their major field of study and the application of AI in that area," unquote. I gave them considerable points for leaning into AI. Whether it will work out for them in courses ranging from ancient Greek literature to inorganic chemistry depends on how much they customize the use and expectations of AI to each course, and that wasn't addressed in the announcement. Next week, we'll conclude the interview with Dagan Shani, when we'll talk about universal basic income, more about Moloch, and the Studio Ghibli incident, and the future of AI-generated visual media. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.